Good morning, good afternoon, and of course a very good evening to wherever in the world you may be. Today I want to give my opinions on a number of what you might say are little and large topics surrounding Islam, such as the seemingly carefully selected beliefs of the various Muslim people themselves, as well as the Necronomicon itself. Yes, the Book of the Dead. I mean the Quran, sorry. I also want us to take a look at the man behind this torrential trail of tripe, and that man is, of course, the so-called Prophet Muhammad. Now, I know there are many people out there who want, and in many cases probably feel, more of a need to express their thoughts and opinions about all the previous mentioned Islamic gibberish, but many people probably fear the backlash that could very well be in store for voicing oneself about this supposed controversial religion, or as I like to see it to be the facts, a cult. So yes, 'tis true that many uncountable people throughout the past who have spoken out against Islam have met their end, and usually quite gruesomely. But why? An endless amount of other religions throughout the world don't tend to behead a person for opting to leave, despite how many can and will be persuasive otherwise for people to reconsider their choice. Yes, many, if not most religions, would have threatened violence and quite possibly death to those who would denounce God of such particular faiths, but I think it's fair to say that most religions these days, be it older or more youthful than that of Islam, have, let's say, matured, like a good cheese, to see that resorting to what I see as basically playground-type bullying suited for 10-year-olds doesn't hold a decent place amongst optional religious beliefs. But of course Islam doesn't seem to want there to be an option. It looks as though it's a case of join or be killed. Denounce yourself and be killed. Oh, and while we're at it, if you don't be or do any of the following either, then be killed. So why is this? What makes Islam, which is now the supposedly second largest growing religion in the world, keep hitting the news these days in what tend to be very controversial topics? Well, let's start from the beginning, shall we, and work our way forward. Maybe we'll find an answer. Well, I think it's only right that we start with the man himself. Muhammad, yes. Well, Muhammad was born around 750 in Mecca, Saudi Arabia. His father died before his birth, and his mother died when he was aged about 6. Prior to his supposed revelations, not much is known about Muhammad. He was married to a wealthy widow called Khadija, who proposed to Muhammad and who was also an employer of his. Interesting fact be it also that before he gained a taste for much younger women, Khadija was said to be 15 years older than him. There's an interesting little fact. Muhammad was believed to have been about 25 years old at the time of their marriage, I believe. Then around the year 610, Muhammad was exploring a cave on something he later described as a religious retreat, and it was here that he supposedly received the command of God via the angel Gabriel, who said to him, "Read in the name of thy Lord who created men of blood coagulated. Read thy Lord is the most beneficent, who taught by the pen, taught that which they knew not unto men." Well, from here, basically, Muhammad went on to spend around 12 years preaching in Mecca. This was done quite privately at first, but it wasn't before long that it started to become more public. During these early years in which Muhammad was preaching, the message that were being given they were fairly peaceful, really, funnily enough. He called for religious tolerance in order to find peace, and though he asked people to turn to Allah, generally the polytheistic Meccans really disliked Muhammad and his preachings, in fact. Eventually he became persecuted, and this turned so bad that he decided to accept an invitation to move cities. So, by 622, Muhammad moved north to Medina after a near 300-mile trek, and it was here that the Muslim community really started to establish itself in becoming something of a political entity that was seen as essential. Well, with that being said, it wasn't long before Muhammad suddenly decided to take a different direction. Yes, it would seem that from here on he went to commit a series of raids against the Meccan caravans. And now, whilst most failed, one raid, known specifically as the Nakala raid, was a success. And to make matters worse, during these goings-on, Muhammad ordered this raid during a time that was declared a holy month, whereby everyone had agreed not to create or cause any conflicts with each other. So understandably, there was quite a lot of anger circulating as people had been killed in these raids, and you could say that it was inevitable that a war was to then break out between the Muslims and Mecca. The people of Mecca tried securing themselves by taking on roughly 1,000 guards to protect them and their properties. So yes, the Muslims of course attacked, and with that would be described as ever-growing forces. So no change there then, but predictably the Muslims ended up winning this battle, regardless of the guards. A battle that became known as the Battle of Badr. It was to be another 10 years of what was basically never-ending battles, after this right up until Muhammad's death in 632. But before his death, Muhammad fought also in what he saw as to be holy wars, God knows how, against Mecca. Other notable battles of this time were such things as the Battle of Ud and the Battle of the Trench. Eventually, after throwing his toys out of the pram a fair few times at the expense of people's lives, Muhammad claimed the city in 630. Well, but this wasn't all. Far from it, in fact. Muhammad attacked other groups as well. In 629, Muslims attacked a Jewish settlement in the oasis of Kaaba in northwestern Arabia. Shortly after the actual conquest of Mecca itself, Muhammad claimed to receive Sahara, which basically ordered Muslims to fight against non-Muslims, such as the Christians and the Jewish, well, unless of course they submit to Islam, naturally. Many Muslim people today will deny this Sahara and try and explain that it basically means the opposite of what it says, but if you go and actually read the passage yourselves, I think you would have to be an idiot to try and see it as meaning anything other than what it is. And that is as previously said. Anyway, by obeying this, Muhammad led an army to the Byzantine Empire to engage in further battle, but Muhammad got sick and died shortly after. So yes, despite how Muslims will only seemingly focus on the good traits of Muhammad and be in denial on all the bad points, or as they see just convert many of them to being justifiable, it would seem today. But let's just break all of this down, shall we, and cast our minds. Muhammad began by robbing caravans upon leaving Mecca. He used greed as one of the biggest enticements in recruiting people to convert to Islam, and if and where he was criticized about his sudden growing wealth, he once said, "Are you disturbed in the mind because of the good things of this life by which I win over people, that they may become Muslim while I entrust you to your Islam?" Yes, his attitude quickly changed once his numbers were growing. In what was no time at all, really, he went from trying to break down his explanations to people to then having anyone who criticized his beliefs killed in whatever manner be it. In according to some early biographical sources, a man named Abu Afak wrote criticizing Islam, and of course with that, those who converted to it. Well, who would believe it that Abu Afak was later killed in his sleep, no less for having the audacity to say such things. In response to Abu's murder, a woman called Asma then stepped up to Islam, speaking of how disgusting it was that they could murder such an elderly man. With this, she took to writing and was trying to get people to take a stand against Islam. So, 10 points to Hufflepuff, if you little puppets can guess what happened next. Of course, Asma was also murdered, and to top that, when the cowardly assassin reported his doings, he was told, "You've helped God and his apostle," followed by, "Two goats won't butt their heads over her." Yeah, that's reassuring, isn't it? Such poetry in their souls these Muslim people have. So, of course, it's no further surprise to hear of how Muhammad had much anger directed towards various groups and sects of people all over the land, including his own followers, if he didn't get his way. He once told his followers, "I will expel the Jews and Christians from the Arabian Peninsula, and will not leave any but Muslims." Yes, I am sure modern-day Muslims will try and convert that too, and say that really he was just asking where the yellow brick road was. Well, it goes well with all of his other delusions. But anyway, back on topic. The Jews of Qurayza resisted Muhammad and his men, and even got enough of a stronghold to form a small alliance for themselves. But despite this, Muhammad had brainwashed, blackmailed, and bribed far too many already to join alongside him, and the numbers were too strong for the Jews to fight against for so long. So naturally they surrendered. Upon surrendering, Muhammad then ordered as many as 700 men and children to be beheaded and buried in trenches that had been dug out in Medina. The women and younger children, as well as countless material belongings, were shared amongst Muhammad and his men. Muhammad, of course, also took the higher percentage of riches for himself, and he was known to do this with basically everything they profited from. So, yes, so far I must say I'm convinced Muhammad was lovely. But it does get better. As they grew in numbers and continued to impose themselves onto town after town, taking all and whatever they wished amongst these items as they saw it, and previously mentioned they would indeed take many women as slaves also. Now, most of these women will be sold or traded eventually, and as we all know now, if you've seen my black slavery video, this is another habit that the Muslim people seem to find hard to let go of. But yes, since the now recruited Muslim soldiers were away from their wives for such long periods of time, you can imagine that tensions were starting to rise, or at least something must have been rising anyway, because the men started to complain of how long the days would last, and I'm sure those days seemed even longer when you're carrying a third leg about. But of course, who'd have guessed it? Muhammad had the answer. Yes, he had had yet another revelation, this time ironically allowing the soldiers to force themselves onto the captive women. But perhaps most disturbing of all this is that Muslims could also have sexual relations with girls who hadn't even reached puberty yet. Yes, the opening verse of chapter 65, I think it is, of the Quran, displays a number of Islamic rules regarding, say, divorce as one topic. According to it, if a Muslim divorces a girl who hasn't yet reached puberty, he must wait 3 months to make sure she isn't pregnant. That's very fatherly, isn't it? As many people know, Muhammad himself had sex with a young girl. His relationships with Aisha began when she was just 6 years old, regardless of what lies Muslims try to tell you different. Some of them will even say, in admitting this, that it wasn't too bad, as she waited 3 years before she slept with him after their marriage. Well, yes, because being 9 is so much better, isn't it? Yes. But despite this, Muhammad being viewed as a prophet of God meant, of course, that his actions still stand to represent many atrocities beset upon young girls even today, especially in the Middle East. Sorry, I just had to shout that one out there to the attention of these idiots. So the fact is that many Muslims believe that everything Muhammad did was basically flawless, and that no matter what, he was perfect. It goes to show just how delusional they are now, probably more so than even during Muhammad's lifetime, as back then at least many people tried to fight against joining Islam. Anyway, that being said, back to the ever-grim present day. And what does the present day have to say? Well, many people the world over have commented on how Europe is becoming something of a post-Christian society, and the understandings of historical Christian values are believed to be diminishing more and more with each passing day. A term used by many observers for this is hollowing out of Christianity. But the very reason such terms are even common to begin with is because there are plenty of people who can see what's happening right in front of them. Literally. Europe, along with many other places within the world, are either rapidly or more steadily giving way under the demands of Islam and the Muslim people. Britain, in fact, is a prime example. Mosques have more worshippers each week than the Church of England has in a month. No, of course, Muslims would argue that they are more loyal to their God, but I'd argue it's more a case of most people are starting to understand now, probably better than ever, that they can think for themselves. They don't need to tiptoe around a supposed entity of sorts to which there is absolutely no scientific proof of existing whatsoever. The most advanced minds throughout our history that have helped propel us into magnificent discoveries, we're either atheist or spiritualist, to say the least. And that's because giving oneself this freedom to think and break away from the fairy tale fantasies of God and so on and so forth, it allows oneself to explore further corners of the mind. Now, in that being said, if the rate at which the Muslim population is growing, along with that of the numbers of people who are choosing not to follow Christianity, then it is near certainty that our cathedrals and so on will be left to wither away over time, or they will be brought out and converted to something else, usually mosques. Yes, that's true, I've witnessed that firsthand very often. The point is, what this country became more established for will fade away and thus be overthrown to make way for what is the next biggest established belief. So in a nutshell, we'd be adopting a predominantly Muslim identity, which in my personal opinion we are already doing in many places. I know there will be all sorts of people now branding me a racist and all of that rubbish, but this isn't something that's only recently been pulled out of a hat. If the general retaliation against Islam at the very time it was establishing itself wasn't enough, in 1968 a speech was made by a man called Enoch Powell that was named Rivers of Blood, where he warned that by allowing access immigration into this country was, in his words, heaping up its own funeral pyre. He also went on to say, amongst other things, that there would of course be huge cultural and religious changes. He spoke of violence on the streets, etc., etc. Now, many people said he was wrong, said that it was racist of him, nothing but his own fantasies, you might say. Yes, of course they were. He was completely wrong, wasn't he? Where instead of being heard, he was deemed, as I say, a racist by the typical pushover do-gooders of the 60s. Why these people see fit to interfere as they do, I don't quite know. Even a foreign ministry report based in Israel stated that not only is Islam the second largest religion in the whole of Europe, but that according to the report, most EU nations saw the presence of Islam provoking many radical Muslims, and that this was of course a big concern to the state's securities. Also within the same report, it was noted about the rapid growth rate of the Muslim population itself. According to the demographic data, the numbers of Muslims is growing faster now than it ever has, and will continue to grow at such a rate due to the high birth rate between Muslim men and their often more than one wives, along with the mass immigration. It goes on to speak of the inevitable influence Muslims will have in shaping Europe in the future development, but personally I believe this is very much out of control already, as I've said. Yes, many do-gooders, including people whom I've argued this with on a number of occasions personally, always ask, why would they want Europe? Well, based on research I did a long time ago, influenced by a documentary I had watched, Europe has had a commonality that has for some time now wanted to unite most, if not all, of the peoples of the world to which either already believed or it was felt would believe in Christianity. As said, many places already followed Christianity, so the heritage was already there for a number of people around the world. But we only have to look through history to see that whenever people have sought the European continent in the past, they have always had troubles with Islam, be it big or small. The main concern really that I have against the cultural change is that Islam would eventually impose itself with such gradual force that it would ultimately continue to divide people and places alike. The reason I say this is because Islam speaks against any other religious practice that isn't Islam. More so extremists, I admit, but it's like a lot of the goings-on lately with Turkey becoming part of the EU, for example. Many Muslims see this as a Christianity basically imposing itself on predominantly Muslim nations, and as we know, there have been some nasty relations because of this assumption. But as said, it's just a delusional assumption by the Muslims. And look at how they react to something they can't say is fact. Imagine what they would impose if given the free rein to do so. Luckily, many European and American officials that aren't corrupted, backhanded payout piss artists are publicly stating that if things carry on the way they are, the continent will be mostly Muslim given just a few decades, if allowed to keep having the freedoms to impose themselves wherever they wish in as many numbers as they see fit. I know a lot of people will probably sneer at that, but again, you only have to cast your mind back, albeit if you're quite young, then open a book to know that it wasn't until the mid-40s, I believe, in this country alone, that immigration was given the go-ahead, and although it was all seemingly slow and steady to begin with, by the 1970s many African-descended men and women, as well as a steady number of Indians and Muslims, were quickly becoming more commonplace. Now, I'm not saying this is a problem, but you've only got to look at it as not even reaching the average lifespan of a modern woman when you put it to the present day, and in just that short period of time, 72 years to be exact, which isn't really anything when you think about it. Just look at how out of control things have become. I think this really says a lot about the future, if nothing else. It does, given things keep going in the direction they seem to be going. And by that I mean we didn't have all of these terrorist attacks and scares and religious conflicts until we started letting these people basically have free rein to go wherever they wanted in the world without really looking at them properly, looking at their backgrounds, looking at their religion. We just open the doors, let them in, and now you cannot open a newspaper or turn on the television without reading about some sort of hate crime, and it's usually these Muslim extremists who are out there doing it. As I said before, I know I'm going to just hear a backlash off people saying I'm hateful, but I don't actually hate Muslims at all. I just wish, like many other religious people of modern day, they didn't have to disassociate themselves from others because of having a difference of opinion. I know people like, well, say Lily Allen will probably want to apologize on my behalf for saying such terrible things. But if we are going to look at hate crime, then why not start with the Muslim people? According to a European Union report, as alongside various different police reports I've read, most of the religious hate crime that's acted out in, let's say France for example, such as burning of schools, wrecking and defacing of graves, and even random unprovoked attacks on just individuals walking the streets, usually leads to the multiple arrests of young Muslim immigrants. Keep in mind, I've just used France as one example. Picked at random, this type of behaviour goes on in many other places. Well, except for the Cotswolds or high-end parts of London, of course. So, yes, look around, poppets. Does it look like things are all hunky-dory and that people such as myself are just blowing things out of proportion? Well, you make up your own minds. I know where my thoughts lie given the present time. I just hope I'm very, very wrong in regards to where my thoughts lie given the near future. So with that, I'm going to go and say a prayer to the two gods I worship, our Lord Common and his disciple Sense. So until next time, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and of course from me a very good night to all.